Hi, my name is Alan. The story I'm about to tell you is fairly recent. It was just a few months ago. And to tell you the truth, I still can't come to terms with whatever it was that I saw that night. Worst of all, you could say that I brought it on myself. The social pressure I felt, coupled with curiosity, made me put myself at a risk that no person ever should have to take. That day, I encountered something that shouldn't exist. It all started on a Thursday night. The streets were pretty empty. Everything was just a little too quiet. That day, we went to the old town cemetery with my schoolmates. They'd all dared me to go into the dark and scary place alone, and I must admit that it was my fault. All week long, I kept saying that all the stories they told about that place weren't true. I also made the mistake of saying that I could get into that place without anything happening to me. And that's when I realized that I shouldn't have said that. One thing led to another, and I ended up betting that I would go to the cemetery at night. My schoolmates accompanied me, but none of them were going to go in since it was something I had to do alone. A friend helped me get over the wall into the cemetery, and once inside, the challenge had begun. I had to get close and film the grave where everyone said they saw ghosts roaming around at night. Armed with nothing but a crappy flashlight, I ventured into the graveyard. The wind was howling, and the moon was barely peeking through the clouds, setting the perfect spooky atmosphere. I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty scared, but also pumped with adrenaline. As I walked through the rows of tombstones, every little sound freaked me out. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling. It was like every horror movie cliché all rolled into one. But I kept going, determined to prove to myself and my friends that I wasn't a total chicken. It was at that moment that I began to feel that something was wrong. Suddenly the night became much colder, but this cold was different. It was an unnatural cold that was making me shiver. I felt that there was something watching me. I didn't know from where. I didn't know what it was. But I felt like I was definitely being watched. I looked everywhere looking for an answer. I was absolutely terrified. I didn't understand what was happening and why without seeing anything. I felt that something horrible was going to happen to me. Then, I saw something move between the graves. A dark figure lurking in the shadows. My heart practically jumped out of my chest. I froze, staring at it, trying to figure out if it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But no, it was real, all right. So there I was, standing, frozen in the cemetery, staring at this dark figure that seemed to materialize out of thin air. My heart was pounding in my chest like a jackhammer, and every instinct in my body was screaming at me to run. But I couldn't move. Fear had me in its icy grip, holding me in place like a deer caught in headlights. The figure seemed to be studying me, its glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. I could feel its gaze like a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving me standing there alone in the eerie silence. I wanted to breathe a sigh of relief, to chalk it up to my overactive imagination. But before I could even take a single step, I heard it. A whisper, soft and sinister, like a snake's hiss in the dead of night. Come. It was barely audible, barely more than a breath on the wind. But it sent a chill down my spine, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the sound, but the darkness seemed to swallow it up, leaving me with nothing but the pounding of my own heart in my ears. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw it. The figure emerging from the shadows once again, its form twisting and contorting in the darkness. It was like something out of a nightmare, all sharp angles and jagged edges, its glowing eyes fixed on me with a hunger that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast, but when I tried to move, my legs refused to cooperate. It was like they were frozen in place, rooted to the spot by some unseen force. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave, threatening to overwhelm me completely. But then, just as I was about to resign myself to my fate, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was pure survival instinct kicking in, or maybe it was just blind, dumb luck. But suddenly I found myself moving, my legs pumping like pistons as I sprinted for the nearest exit. Behind me, I could hear the creature giving chase, its footsteps echoing through the darkness like the tolling of a death knell. I pushed myself harder, willing my legs to go faster, faster, and faster. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck, could hear its guttural growls growing closer and closer with every passing second. In the middle of the run, I stumbled, and I could see how that strange being stood next to me, watching me. At that moment, one might think it was even harmless. But I was there, and I can tell you, it was exactly the opposite. Whatever it was, it wanted to hurt me. I could feel a tense aura of frustration and malice radiating directly at me. As soon as the monster got close to me, my breath caught, and I began to feel very sick. It was as if I was suffocating, just by being close. Somehow I fought it off and was able to drag myself far enough away to catch my breath and run again. I was dizzy, confused, and sore, but somehow I managed to find a part of the wall that I could climb over and escape the cemetery. And then, just when I thought I couldn't run anymore, I burst out of the cemetery and into the cool night air. I didn't stop running until I was halfway home, my lungs burning and my legs feeling like jelly. But even then, I didn't dare to stop, didn't dare to look back. I didn't wait for my friends. I just ran as much as I could. It wasn't until I was safely back inside my own house with the door locked and bolted behind me that I allowed myself to collapse onto the floor in exhaustion. I lay there for what felt like hours, gasping for breath and trying to make sense of what had just happened. But deep down, I knew that some things were better left unexplained. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. And as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat slowly returning to normal, I made a silent vow to myself. I would never, ever set foot in that cemetery again. Because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some horrors, once faced, can never be forgotten. What would you do if you were hired to record paranormal activities on camera? Would you be up to capturing footage of a ghost? Let me know after you hear my story. Having a tech security company in a small town like mine is great. You have zero competition and a lot of clients. My company sells digital locks, CCTV cameras, doorbell cams, surveillance drones, and a lot of other digital security tools and software. All the big stores in wealthy neighborhoods are my customers. I'm doing pretty well for myself, and my employees too. However, recently, the keeper of the local cemetery has been nagging me for a security system. I mean, why does a cemetery need a high-tech security system anyway? So I've been putting off meeting with him, as I have other clients to attend to. Also, the cemetery has a history. Cemetery keepers typically didn't last for a long duration. A lot of people living near the cemetery complain that they've seen weird things and heard noises coming from the cemetery at night. The town council decided to hire me to secure the cemetery, and I'm not really interested. As a kid, I used to hang out in the cemetery with my buddies at night to smoke pot and drink. We even brought girls there. I'm pretty sure teenagers today are doing the same, and honestly, I don't want to end the fun. But putting CCTV cameras all over the place definitely would. I'm sure the weird noises and sightings are nothing but the kids going in and out of the cemetery to party. However, today, as I got into my office, I spotted the cemetery keeper sitting in the lounging area. He was a man my father's age, and he looked visibly distressed. The moment he spotted me, he walked up to me. "Oh, John, you're finally here. I've been waiting for you. I tried to get in touch many times, but you were always unavailable. So I decided to come here. Can we talk?" I just gave him a strange smile and motioned him to walk towards my office. "So how can I help you, Mr. Flemings?" I asked, even though I knew exactly what he wanted.
"I need you to put up one of your security systems in the cemetery. Lately there's been a lot of incidents,"
he said, and looked very disturbed. He had been the cemetery keeper for the last decade, and I knew he was aware of the teenagers sneaking into the cemetery. "Mr. Fleming, I think it's just the teenagers who are partying at the cemetery. You know, in this small town, it's the only place where they get any privacy to have fun. I was one of them too." He just stared at me for a few seconds with that disturbed look on his face, and then said,
"It's not the kids. I know. Lately I've seen things in the cemetery that I've never seen in my 10 years of service. I don't know how to deal with it. I asked the council for more security guards, but without any sort of proof, they are not willing to hire anyone other than me and Bob. But when I suggested hiring you, they agreed. So, I need your help."
I knew all we were going to find were some kids doing drugs and drinking, but Mr. Fleming looked so desperate that I agreed to help him. However, instead of suggesting a suitable surveillance system, I decided to just have a drone scouting the cemetery at night. I assured Mr. Fleming that I would be there for the first couple of days to control the drone, and we can then decide which security system would be best for the cemetery. However, I was not expecting what happened next. Mr. Fleming left my office satisfied, but he had conveniently hidden a detail about the cemetery from me. The coming weekend, I visited the cemetery with a basic drone with a camera on it and its controller. I was doing this just because Mr. Fleming had personally visited me to ask for help. There I met Bob, who was the gravedigger. Bob, too, had worked around a decade in the cemetery. Bob looked even more scared and worried than Mr. Fleming.
"Thanks for coming, lad,"
Bob said to me. "No worries, sir. Can we start the surveillance now?" I asked the duo.
"Yeah, but I hope Noel told you why we are insisting on a security camera,"
Bob said, pointing at Mr. Fleming. "Yeah, because you guys have been seeing and hearing things."
"No. I mean, yes, we have been experiencing incidents that cannot be explained. But she is back."
"She? Who is she?"
"The crying widow,"
Bob said, with disgust and fear on his face. When he saw the confusion on my face, he explained further.
"Well, back in the 40s when the soldiers were returning from the war, the ones who didn't make it were buried in this cemetery. But one particular soldier who was quite young and had married just before leaving died too. His widow used to visit his grave every day and cry. Some days later, they found her dead in the bathtub of their home. She had slit her wrists and bled to death. But she had penned a note before killing herself. She couldn't bear the pain of being separated from her beloved anymore. She wanted to be with him, and so she decided to die. She was buried beside him too, but a few days later the cemetery keepers heard her crying by his grave at night. They heard her weeping all the time when she was alive. But when they heard the same voice after her death, they were scared. This matter was then addressed by the priest, and everything stopped. I was a little lad back then, but recently some of the old graves were dug up, and since then we've started to hear the crying again. Not just that, some of the neighbors also complained about a woman crying, so we know it's not just us. Plus, the other day a group of kids loitering in the cemetery came running to us, stating a weirdly dressed woman was crying by a grave. "You got to help us, boy," Bob said. Even though I didn't believe in the paranormal, I was a bit terrified. I started flying the drone around the cemetery. As I was holding the controller with the screen on it, Bob and Mr. Fleming were peering over my shoulder to look at the screen too. It was around 1 a.m. now. Firstly, I flew the drone over the compound wall, making sure no one was sneaking in to prank these two old men. Then we started scouting the cemetery from the main entrance where we were. For a solid 20 minutes, we didn't see or hear anything. But every passing second, I was getting more and more sure that there was nothing in this cemetery. But just to satisfy these two old men, I continued doing my job. The drone was flying and we were seeing nothing but old graves and trees. Then suddenly, we heard a shrill cry from the speaker. It sounded as if a lady was crying. I kept the drone at the same pace, and then a tall gravestone came into view. There, beside it, was a hunched-over female figure wearing weird clothes. And as soon as the drone flew closer to the grave, the woman got up and ran in the opposite direction. I turned the drone sideways to make sure that there was no one else, and then followed the woman. But she was nowhere to be found. I wasn't ready to believe what I'd seen, even if Bob and Mr. Fleming were going crazy beside me. I swept the drone through the whole cemetery and flew it above that particular grave a couple of times. But I never saw the woman again. The next day, the footage was presented to the town council, and people were pretty scared. They decided to take the necessary steps to counter the roaming spirit. But I still don't know if it's true or not. So while Bob and Mr. Fleming were busy with the council meeting, I walked up to the grave. The ground was damp due to the rain, and I investigated the area around the grave. If a real person was pulling a prank by crying near the grave, he or she would have left some footprints on the soft ground. But there were no footprints other than mine. Moreover, no person could have outrun my drone. So where could that person have possibly disappeared to? Did she hide behind a grave or climb a tree? But I knew that that was highly unlikely. I had no explanation to justify what I saw, other than accepting the fact that I caught a ghost on camera.
Nicole and Smith both lived in a city hostel. These individuals decided to go out to eat one evening. They rode their bikes outside at 11 p.m. to eat in this manner. Smith told Nicole to take the short forest path after supper so he could get to his hostel as soon as possible. Nicole, on the other hand, refused and stated that this route should not be taken because it passes through an abandoned cemetery. Smith informs him that it is on the right side of the forest, whereas we will be traversing the left. Nicole agreed with him, and they both went down this road. They arrived near the abandoned cemetery after some time on that path. Nicole announced immediately that we had arrived at the cemetery. According to Smith, the cemetery should have been on the opposite side of the forest. What brought it here? Nicole orders him to leave the area immediately, fearing for his safety. Nicole noticed movement in the cemetery as soon as Smith reversed the bicycle. Nicole tightened his grip on Smith's shoulders when he noticed this, prompting Smith to inquire, "What's the matter with you? Why are you putting so much pressure on my shoulders?" Nicole informs him, terrified, that he has just seen movement in the cemetery. Smith then inquired as to the location of the movement. "There is someone in the cemetery, over there," said Nicole, motioning to him. Smith became terrified upon hearing this and stated that he does not wish to observe anything. "We should leave this area as soon as possible, because I'm starting to get scared." Nicole stated that there is someone present on this occasion. When Smith looked there, he found nothing. However, Nicole stated numerous times that there is someone present there. "Can't you see?" Smith claimed, "I can't see anything. What do you see?" Nicole claims, "A white cloth moving to the right and left on a regular basis." After hearing this, Smith became even more terrified. Nicole began telling Smith to leave immediately. Smith left after Nicole repeated this several times. Nicole eventually heard a sound in his ear, as if someone is telling him, "Stop, or else I'll kill you." Nicole became terrified when he heard this and began yelling, "Go fast!" at Smith. Then Smith inquired as to what occurred. Smith's gaze was drawn to the bike's mirror. He noticed a woman in white chasing him through the air. When Smith saw this, he became terrified and increased the speed of the bike. Fearful, they arrived at their hostel, went to their room, and fell asleep after locking the gate. The next day, a college holiday, they both left for home, promising not to tell anyone about the incident. The next day, Smith receives a phone call, and when he answers it, he discovers that it's Nicole's mother. Picking up the phone, Nicole's mother informed Smith that he hasn't eaten or spoken to anyone since Nicole returned home. He spends the entire day in his room, and there's a sound of someone talking to someone from his room in the middle of the night while no one is in his room. Do you know anything about it? Smith became terrified and reported the incident to Nicole's mother. His mother was also terrified upon hearing this information. She reprimanded Smith, saying that, "All this occurred and you didn't tell anyone? What if something terrible were to occur?" Smith stated that, "Because we were terrified, we did not tell anyone." Nicole was conversing with another individual in his room while his mother listened in through the door on the same evening. She entered the room because she did not comprehend anything. Inside, they observed Nicole standing in a dark corner with his back to the wall and mumbling. "Nicole, what are you talking about?" questioned his mother. Nicole did not respond, but he did stop babbling. "Tell me, who are you talking to?" she inquired. That's when Nicole shouted,
"Leave me in that cemetery and come, old lady. That is my residence. I'll bring your child with me."
Nicole's tone of voice had changed. His eyes turned red, and his voice sounded as if 2 to 3 people were saying all of this at the same time. Nicole collapsed unconscious after saying all of this. His mother became terrified and picked him up and made him lie on the bed. Then she called her husband and told him everything. Nicole's father returned from work after an hour. Nicole's mother started crying and asked, "What happened to our son?" When she sees him, "Please correct it." Nicole is driven to church by his parents the next day. The priest places his hand on Nicole's head, closes her eyes, and then opens her eyes and declares that he is possessed by a witch. She had followed it out of the cemetery and it returned to him. She would also like to accompany him to the cemetery. Nicole's mother burst into tears upon hearing this. She asked the priest, "Save my son." According to the priest, this witch followed your son's scent to your house. As a result, its odor must drive it away. You dispose of his clothing from today in the same cemetery without washing it. Don't worry, I'll keep the witch until you return with the clothes. You must, however, complete the task tonight only. Nicole's parents became enraged upon hearing this and brought his clothes to the cemetery that night to be stored there. "We left your victim in the graveyard. You should leave," the priest responded. "Do not return again." After that, the witch returned to the abandoned graveyard. Nicole was now free of the witch's clutches. The priest advised Nicole's family that your son should never take that road by accident. After saying this, the priest sent all 3 of them out of the church, and they returned home happy.
The first thing I remember is waking up in a bed at the hospital I work in, and the face of that beautiful woman. One of my colleagues, a fellow doctor who worked with me, was staring down at me besides the bed I was lying in. Along with him, there was a senior doctor and 4 to 5 nurses doing the same. They all looked concerned and confused. "Are you okay, Harry?" the senior doctor asked me. "Yeah," I replied, and at that moment I realized that my head hurt like someone was piercing a stake through it. The doctor made sure I was all right, prescribed some meds to me, and left. And so did the group of worried nurses. But my friend George stood beside my bed, still worried and more confused than ever. When everyone walked far enough, he asked me,
What happened, man?
You tell me. For how long have I been in this bed? I asked, and when I looked down at myself, I realized that I had been changed into the patient's dress.
2 days. I've been waiting beside your bed for 2 days, begging God to get you out of the coma.
Coma? What coma?
Buddy, you were in a coma for 2 days, and the dean wasn't sure you would wake up. It was truly shocking to find one of our own staff members in our own hospital bed in such bad shape.
I sighed, too tired to talk all of a sudden.
Do you remember anything?
To be honest, all I remembered was her face. But I wasn't about to tell George that, so instead I asked, "What happened to me?"
As usual, you took the last shift on Friday. Nurse Catherine was there with you on your night rounds, but before visiting your last patient, you took a break according to her. And the next thing we all know, you were found unconscious in the lift on Saturday morning by the liftman.
When he narrated the incident to me, some of my missing memories hit me like a train wreck. I still don't remember much. I lied to George, even though now I could remember what truly led me to this hospital bed, but I was still not ready to tell it to my friend. Partly because what happened was so bizarre that no one, not even George, would believe me. I decided to drink some water and sleep for a while as the headache was killing me. But I don't mind telling you guys what happened because I believe some of you will believe me. So as George said, I was on my night rounds, which I had done for the past 6 months, since I joined this hospital as a doctor. I loved the night shift as I got the whole day to myself, and I really didn't mind the quiet of the night. Most of the staff was friendly, and a senior nurse, Catherine, always accompanied me on my rounds each night. But that day, unlike any other time, I had this urge to take a break before seeing my last patient for the night. And when I say break, I mean a smoke. Now I know, I'm a doctor and I shouldn't smoke and all, but smoking is my only guilty pleasure, and to be honest, I never regretted it until that night. The hospital had a no-smoking policy that everyone had to follow, and even in the staff rooms, we weren't allowed to smoke, so the best place in the hospital premises to smoke was the cemetery. Yes, the hospital had a special cemetery to bury the bodies which were donated to the hospital. It was located at the far end of the property, and hardly anyone ever went there. The lift in the west wing of the hospital opened directly in front of the cemetery gates, and as I mentioned earlier, no one ever goes there, and definitely not at night. So I was sure that no one would catch me smoking. I entered the cemetery and sat on a bench, lit my cigarette, and just sat there staring at the stars in the night sky. After a couple of minutes, I heard the crying. Soft sobs of a woman, possibly young, were coming from the far side of the cemetery. Now, you may think this is how every horror movie ever starts, but I didn't think much of it, as I'd been visiting the cemetery for the past 6 months at night, and I'd never had any abnormal or paranormal experiences. I threw my cigarette on the ground, stamped it out, and walked towards the cries. In front of me was a beautiful young girl, must have been in her 20s, crying in front of a grave. It was dark for me to see whose grave it was, but honestly, I didn't care. All I cared about was the crying girl in front of me. "Are you okay?"
Honestly, no.
The girl seemed awfully honest.
She died, and no one even cared. They gave her body to science, not even bothered to honor her with a proper burial.
"What's your name?" I asked. The girl wiped her eyes, stood up, offered me a stunning smile through her teary eyes.
Philomena Darcy,
she said. "Nice to meet you, Philomena. I'm Harry. I'm a doctor here."
I figured,
she said, pointing at my blue scrubs, the white coat, and the stethoscope hanging on my neck.
"So, you like coming to cemeteries at night?"
she asked. "I could ask you the same."
"Well, there is no right time to grieve, is there?"
"I guess not. But aren't you scared?" I asked.
"Scared of what? I've lost the most precious thing to me. I believe that monsters are in the living world and not amongst the dead, so no, I'm not scared."
I was impressed by her answer, and I wanted to talk to her more. "Would you like to have a coffee in the canteen? Looks like you could use one."
"Sure.
she said and smiled again. I led the way and we both walked towards the elevator I used to get there. As we waited for the elevator, we started speaking. Philomena turned out to be an interesting person. She stepped into the elevator and I stepped in after her. In the distance, I could hear a cane, as if someone old was walking towards us. Then I saw it. An old man wearing a hospital gown was walking towards us using a wooden cane. At that moment, I panicked and started pressing the button in the elevator that closes its doors. Philomena sensed my panic and asked me what it was. I was almost out of breath and heaving by the time the elevator was on the first floor. The old man had a red ribbon tied to his hand. In this hospital, only the bodies who are dead have a red ribbon on their wrist, indicating they are dead. The fact that he had a ribbon meant he was dead and he was approaching our elevator. After listening to me, Philomena was awfully silent. I looked at her face, which was dead serious, deprived of any tears or smiles. She raised her wrist and spoke. "Do you mean a ribbon like this?" She had a red ribbon identical to the old man in her hand. "I was crying at my own grave, Doctor." The next thing I know, everything was going black. That night in the cemetery, I saw not one but 2 ghosts, which led me to this hospital bed. Now, when I join my work crew again, I swear to God, I'm never ever going to take a break to smoke.